May I just introduce myself? My name is Attila Pók, P-O-K. My name in English means spider. That means so I am trying to establish connections. And honestly, when I was preparing for this, I promised myself that I am not going to be personal. But having listened to all the speakers before me, I'm afraid I cannot avoid it. So, but first of all, I should like to thank all the organizers for making this possible, and all the front staff and back staff of the Harriman Institute and the East Central European Center, because I think for all of us who are present, this is a memorable day that we shall keep in our memory. Now, why is it important for me to be personal? Because it was exactly 25 years ago, in the fall of '98, that I came for the first time to lecture at Columbia, because István invited me because he said, well, there seems to be emerging here some kind of an opportunity for a visiting something. And would you be interested? And I was interested. And this was the basis of a big project that is now called the István Deák Visiting Professorship. And I should like to express my repeated gratitude to all the people who are here and who are not here. Vicky is here, who was among them. Volker in the back row was also essential. Ivan Sanders, who unfortunately passed away a few, 1 or 2 weeks ago, but his wife and son is here. And all the people who, family members, so it was a joint project. And for a joint project, I think you need four things. First of all, you need a great man. Someone with a charisma, someone with a knowledge, someone with a mission in the world. And István was that kind of person. But that's not enough, In addition to that, you also need an institution. And this is the Columbia and Harriman Institute and East Central European Center that made this possible. But all these things are still not enough if you do not have money. I learned both at home, but especially here at Columbia, I learned how important funding is. And we had to do funding. And funding wouldn't have been possible if the Bitos, Olivia and László Bito, wouldn't have approached István and wouldn't have contributed substantially to creating the endowment that up to the present day is supporting this visiting professorship. Unfortunately, Olivia is sick, though she was trying to do everything in order to help this event, but maybe she is going to join us in the afternoon. But the fourth thing is you need friends. And István had an incredibly great number of friends. In Hungary and outside Hungary, but everywhere he had lots of friends. And this network made this great project possible that ever since '99 has been functioning properly. Now, two members of the panel, whom you see here, were also privileged to have the opportunity to be supported by this visiting professorship, and also myself, and I think it was a decisive moment in our life. Now, there is another anniversary as well, because it was exactly 20 years ago that the gift agreement of the Bitos was signed here in SIPA, and it laid down the foundations of the project that has been going ever since. But I do not want to take up more time, and I should like to introduce the members of the panel, one by one. Our first speaker is Judith Molnár from the University of Szeged. She is a great specialist of Second World War and Holocaust history, and she has a very close connection to sources. And she has published a number of monographs and a number of also source publications, but she is also the kind of person who is building bridges between the audience and the sources and the historical scholarship. So she was responsible for setting up the permanent exhibition in the Budapest Holocaust Museum. And So she came up with an unusual type of presentation. So she has a lot of photographs about István's life, and I think this will be a good introduction. There is one member of the panel who unfortunately was unable to join us, and that is Professor Gatti, because of his illness. But I am trying to do my best to read his presentation. So and now I think you will have the opportunity to enjoy and compare all kinds of Hungarian accents during this panel. Okay? So thank you very much, and now Judith, the floor is yours. Oh, sorry, before that, I'm sorry. I am not popular. I have to read something. A message, right? A message from the Honáks, from the Honák family. Because Peter Honák and István were very good friends, and members of the Honák family also wanted to participate in this event, but unfortunately they couldn't come. We just met at the airport, and András Honák had to leave for Hong Kong, and we were leaving for New York. But anyway, András Honák, a son of one of the sons of Peter, asked me to read the following letter in front of the audience. Dear participants, October the 6th is a notorious day in the history of Hungary. On this day in 1849, 13 officers of the Hungarian Independence Army of diverse ethnic background had been hanged. Hungary's first Prime Minister Lajos Batthyány was shot in the head. Incidentally, historian Peter Honák, a very close and good friend of István, passed away in 1997 on this dark day. And at this point, I should like to point out, you should meet my young friend, Peter Csunderlik, who has just recently published an extensive biography of Peter Honák. The sons of Peter Honák and the entire Honák clan are pleased that this conference takes place here in New York City. One of us, ideally myself, says András, wanted to attend, but this didn't work out. We wish you a vibrant and productive conference, just like István was. We are confident that this is not the last event for recollecting the life and achievements of István Deák. So thank you very much, and sorry, Judith, the floor is yours.
Okay. First, I would like to thank Harriman Institute for inviting me to this memorial session. It is an honor to be here. The purpose of my short presentation is to interest you all in István's memoir, Maratoni Életem. Already in June, the book appeared in Hungary, and it is a hit. The book has 3 parts. In the first, István introduces his family and childhood in a very charming style. The second part is about his years of immigration in Paris and Munich. And the third part is titled America. I certainly do not intend to talk about the entire course of his life, just offer some glances into each of the periods. Most of the photos I show are in the volume, but you will also see some that were not published. I quote István: "The central topic of my autobiography is, of course, my eventful life. For people living in Central and Eastern Europe at the time, life was almost inevitably eventful. For me, however, no less compelling is a topic that is connected to the first, the attempt of a significant number, perhaps the absolute majority of the many millions of Jews living in Central and Eastern Europe, to be accepted by the so-called Christian middle class, ideally also by the historical aristocracy." Following these introductory thoughts, he delves into the description of his family's assimilations past. On his father's side, great-grandfather Manu Deutsch was a kind of substitute National Guardsman who, even after the revolution, remained a supporter of Kossuth's party. In the photo, we see him in the family circle in a bochkai suit around 1860s. Grandfather, David, is standing in the back on the left. István's paternal grandfather changed his name from Deutsch to Deák in 1894. The photo was taken approximately 10 years later, around 1905, when he is seen as a father of four. On the left is István's father. The four young men served in World War I, all the rank of officers. In civilian life, two graduated from business school. They inherited their father's department store in Székesfehérvár, which they expanded and set up a booming partner business in Budapest. The two other sons, one of them, István's father, attended the Cistercian Orders High School in Székesfehérvár. One of them became a lawyer, while István's father received a diploma in mechanical engineering. The maternal grandfather died early. Grandmother, Gisella, raised her three children on her own, among them Anna, called Annus in the family, who was István's mother. Pension Gisella in Harisköz, in the inner city of Budapest, had a good reputation. The parents were married in 1920, and the children were born in 1922 and 1926. It is important to note that the family had converted to Catholicism. István was baptized in the Catholic faith. In his memoir, István writes at length with his school years and whether his schoolmates used abusive language about Jews or not. They used. He writes a detailed account about his acceptance by the Boy Scouts, first as a Wolf Cub in elementary school and later in high school. He was much less easily admitted into the Boy Scout troop of his high school than in elementary school. Times has changed. It was 1939. The second anti-Jewish law had been passed. I would like to draw attention to the validity of the Boy Scout ID 1944. In 1944, when he was called up for forced labor, he left for the Keleti railway station wearing his Boy Scout uniform with the yellow star. István gives a long account of Béla Stollár's role in their lives and several times returns to Stollár, who participated in the resistance movement. He was the great love of his sister, and by providing false identification, he helped the Deák family to survive. István emphasized that fact several times in his memoir, and it is quite obvious that they greatly admired Stollár. István, by chance, witnessed the public hanging of Péter Rotyis and Sándor Szívós on February 4, 1945. Then, as he said, came chaos, transition, and a new beginning. Beginning. This is a certification for István, proof that he worked at the Lantos used and the rare books shop in 1945. In 1948, he made two big decisions: to leave Hungary and start smoking a pipe. Regarding the latter decision, I read you a sentence because it is such a good example of István's style. I quote, "In those times, smoking a pipe was a professional requirement. It was expected from a young historian to arrive at a conference with a pipe in his mouth and tempt the tobacco, by thinking about a clear answer for some complicated questions. End of quote. He had very wretched lodgings in Paris. Still, as he writes, he had a great time. He regularly met Peter Gál, his high school friend, who later, during István's Munich stay, helped him to mail his letters home. István spent, this was the time when he began chasing after the diploma with the support of the International Rescue Committee. István spent the first half of the 1950s at Radio Free Europe, mainly in Munich, where he had a splendid life, and he was even able to buy a BMW. István had a hard time when his parents, as a consequence of his employment at Radio Free Europe, were interred in this small village, Körös-Nagyharsány, in Békés County in 1955. Later on, in the 1960s, he and his wife, Gloria, visited the Mátés, in whose house his parents were lodged during their internment. In September 1956, he immigrated to the United States. In 1964, he defended his PhD dissertation at Columbia University. István and Gloria were married in 1959, and Kisiva arrived in 1965. Besides his family, university studies, and his professional career, he writes about two important events in his life: taking home the crown and his first marathon run in 1977. As you see on this photo, István is sitting on the metal case of the coronation robe, and it appears that he is swinging his legs. In January 1978, after negotiations during which István was consulted, the United States returned St. Stephen's crown and crown jewels to Hungary. He was hurt understandably that, though a member of the American delegation, no Hungarian newspaper published a photo with him in it. He singled out the front page of the Magyar Hírek because he remembered that he was standing next to the actress Eva Rutkai and assumed that he had been excised from the photo. Thanks to my dear, recently deceased friend, Kati Jalsowski, who was the 20th century photo expert of the Hungarian National Museum, we managed to establish that at the moment when photographer Ferenc Novota took the picture, István was not standing next to Rutkai. But I have to say, at first glance, the photo even confused Kati's practiced eyes. She saw that two photos had been cut to one. The New York Marathon is a public festival, writes István. In 1977, he participated in it for the first time and wrote at length about his experience. And finally, with these two photos, I close my presentation, that was taken in the 2000s. He is Lajos Kossuth statue on Riverside Drive. Anyone who has visited the Deák salon, and I think most of you here did, knows that the apartment looked out over the statue. Thank you for your attention.
So thank you very much. Perhaps this is the right moment that we think for a minute of Gloria, without whose support, I think István's life work wouldn't have been the same as it is. And they spent the last couple of years at a special home under the careful attention of Eva. So I think we have to express our gratitude to Eva, and we have to give some thoughts to Gloria also at this moment. Thank you very much. And now our next speaker is Csaba Békés from Budapest. He was visiting professor, if I properly count, 5 times within the framework of this program. He is a specialist of Cold War history. His last major publication is a comprehensive book about Hungary's international relations from the end of the Second World War to the collapse of the Soviet Union. He created a research center of his own about the history of the Cold War, but is also associated with the Institute, with the University of Economics, Corvinus University, and the Institute of Political Science, which is now no more part of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, but a special research network. So, Csaba, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much for the introduction, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear friends. It's a great pleasure for me to be able to be part of this commemoration. As it was mentioned already, I was the István Deák visiting professor here 5 times. In the first occasion it was 2007 and the last one in 2016. And of course that was, as Attila just said, really a life-changing experience, as it usually said. And in this case, it was absolutely true. Not just for the job itself, you know, to teach at Columbia, it's not a bad thing, right? But especially from Hungary, right? It came with the boss. It came with István, you know, and that was an extra. It was a bonus, you know, which nobody really could count how it would work. You know, I knew István since 1992, technically, but actually we became really good colleagues and then actually close friends during those years between 2007 and 2016. And I spent a lot of time in the famous apartment on Riverside Drive, because actually in the first 3 cases, I lived in the same building, just 1 floor below their apartment, which meant that we met very, very often. Of course, in their apartment as their guest, and I'm very grateful for that. And that was always a pleasure and a fantastic experience for us. With this kind of personal introduction, let me just also draw attention to 2 other commemorations or kind of tributes to István, which are different from the one which we already know very well from the program and from the distributed journal, the special issue, the Journal of Austrian-American History, which Dominic was the front person, so to say, in organizing, and I'm very, very happy that it came out so relatively so soon, and that was really a great contribution to the commemoration on István's work and legacy. But also, let me also mention selfishly another one which was published in H. Diplo, same time in June 2013, and this is also available online in English for free without any problem. And this was a kind of like shorter kind of genre, which it has an introduction and 4 reviews, or 4 essays actually, about the author's experiences. And the introduction was done by me because I was the organizer of the H. Diplo kind of tribute. And then we had 4 excellent panelists, so to say, people who were somehow connected to István in different capacities. Volker Berghahn, who is with us here in the last row and will appear as the kind of person introducing the keynote speech today, later, and who was a friend and colleague here at Columbia. And then the other was Holly Case, whose name is very familiar to everyone here, right? I don't have to introduce her. And Attila Pók also doesn't need introduction because he has been speaking for until right now in this panel. And the final one, last but not least, he was Moshe Temkin, who was also a student of István's here at Columbia University, and now he's at Harvard University. And another one, kind of surprise thing, which I didn't know about for a long time, it was a kind of tribute organized by the Hungarian Studies Review. Hungarian Studies Review is a journal publishing Hungarian-oriented, Hungarian kind of topic articles and everything else. And it's published in the United States, in its headquarters in Texas. And they organized such a kind of tribute with the participation of scholars. It's not about students, former students of István, but scholars of István who were somehow affected, influenced by István works and activity and everything else. And then this would come out soon. It's not yet out, but it will be coming out soon. And I was also glad to be able to participate in that review or in that kind of tribute, giving my own experience about István, especially talking about my many conversations with István, because as I mentioned, we had a lot of time together and we spoke a lot together, and that was the kind of extra experience for me while being at Columbia, which was a worthless experience, of course, and I learned a lot from him. I hope we actually mutually impacted each other in different ways, because our way of thinking and approach to history writing is I think, very similar. So I was very lucky to find something here in the United States who was thinking very much in the same way as I was thinking. While in Hungary, history writing is a very conservative genre and field, and you actually don't really have the liberty to introduce new ideas or question mainstream positions, because you are looked upon in a suspicious way by your colleagues or peers and everybody else. And it takes a long time until perhaps they would actually accept your ideas, whatever. But it takes a long time, and it's not an easy job. Here, it was not a problem. So with István, we actually were on the same wavelength from the beginning. With this, let me just come to the topic of the presentation, which I planned for today. And I chose the Second World War. I chose to talk about what István contributed to the historiography of the Second World War, especially in his last and most influential book, Europe on Trial, which doesn't need to be introduced also. Here, it is his last book. That's also a kind of important point here. But also, it was the most universal topic, general topic of history, which he was dealing with towards the end of his life, and it was basically in his 80s when he turned to this topic so effectively, because he was dealing with these kind of things already earlier, of course. But now he from the 1990s he started to work into different fields, which of course are very interconnected. The Second World War, the general history of the Second World War, and the Holocaust, of course. The Holocaust will be treated by my colleague László Karsai, so I'm not talking about that topic here, but I'm trying to focus on what István was contributing to our knowledge on the Second World War. This was also the most influential book, as I mentioned, which is also shown by the very simple fact that it was translated into 6 languages so far. 6 languages, which is, of course, a great achievement, and who knows, it could be still translated into other languages as well. which also shows that there is an interest for that. You know, the Second World War is a big topic. It's a really universal topic, which is important for everyone. Then the big question here is what new could be said about the Second World War today or recently, because there are hundreds, if not thousands of books published on the history of the Second World War. Everybody knows that, right? Even more perhaps than about the Kennedy Association. But of course now the question is whether István was really successful in trying to find a kind of new approach, and he did. He did find such a new approach. He succeeded in producing this new book, which was about the Second World War, again about the whole the Second World War as such, but also it had a very special focus, and it was the human factor. The human factor, of course, which many of you have already mentioned today in different kinds of contexts. And also we know that this was a kind of unique feature, or one of the most important features of István's worldview and habit. And I think he was basically, you mentioned many things in what István was. Actually, I think he was a humanist in the first place, and then he of course was a scholar and everything else, you know. But being as a man, the person, the humanist, that was affecting all of his life and his activity and scholarly work as well. And he actually found this new approach in presenting Europe on trial about resistance and collaboration and retribution during the Second World War. But all this was not without a prehistory. It didn't come out of the blue, of course. As I mentioned, he was already working on such topics earlier. And of course, the very famous reviews in the New York Review of Books and the New Republic, which were mentioned already by several people here. And then in 2000, he published a book about the politics of retribution in Europe, World War II, and its aftermath, together with Tony Judt and Jante Gross, which was an edited volume. Everybody knows also this very famous and very influential book as well, in which István also played a great role. But then his own essays, which were published in the New York Review of Books and New Republic, were coming out in 2001 as a book now called The Essays on Hitler's Europe, which actually showed István's very strong determination to do something big on the Second World War. You know, it was not yet the big thing. You know, it was kind of like looking around and investigating the problem and searching for topics and everything else, but actually it was in the making. And then the book in 2015 was published, really, Europe on Trial. And here also let me just mention what before I'm going into the details of why this book was so interesting and so influential, about his own credo as a historian. I wrote in this H. Diplo tribute, which I mentioned earlier, and I'm quoting from that piece. István credo as a historian was something which was special. He liked, in fact, he enjoyed challenging traditional, convenient, mainstream narratives. He was always thought-provoking, raising surprising or unusual and really often purposefully uncomfortable questions. He was a born revisionist in the best sense of the word, as he always wanted to revisit old positions and use a fresh, critical and dialectical approach in dealing with his subject matter. And he never cared about any potential reactions. At least that's what I see. While his revisionist drive can be traced basically in all of his works, in the previous ones as well, this approach is truly culminating in his last book, Europe on Trial. And then let's see what this new book, Europe on Train, offers the reader. And well, of course, in this limited time, I can just highlight a couple of main issues, main problems, main themes, which I imagine are the most important ones. So these are definitely subjective, because a lot of other claims, statements, and positions and theories could be mentioned as well, because there are a lot in the book. But I'm not going into that because we don't have time for that. So first of all, as I mentioned, it is about the human dimension. It is about the Second World War. It gives also a kind of general history of the Second World War, so it could be read as a history of the Second World War. But of course, it's not a kind of technical story of the Second World War. It doesn't tell you everything. You know, it tells what the author thinks important in this case, and that's the human dimension. That's how societies behaved during the Second World War. And there was a novel approach to this issue in István's work, which I find as it's a threefold kind of thing. Number one, that he was the first to deal with these topics together, that is resistance, collaboration, and retribution during the war. These were written about, especially in the case of Western Europe already, previously, of course, a lot, in some cases. However, they were usually treated just individually. And now István brought these three dimensions together. And that was one of the big novelties. And then the number one is to treat the western part of eastern part of Europe together again as a kind of new element and a new approach. They were dealt with and analyzed by together, not just individually. As I said, the literature on Western Europe is quite rich, but on the Eastern Europe part, the literature is very poor. And still, he was trying to get what he could, and he brought all that together. And then there is no big discrepancy between the two, and that's the kind of added value of István works. He could present it as if the raw material we are working from would be the same, and it is not. Still on the Western side there is much more, but he actually could balance this in a very good way and very effective way, so that you don't see the big difference. And his picture, his presentation is actually very convincing when he's treating these two topics together. And also, number three is that he is presenting this in a kind of new approach, and he emphasizes from the beginning that this development, collaboration, resistance, and retribution became new kind of elements of this kind of big story after the Second World War, because it did not happen in the same way after the First World War. That could have been the case, but it was not. The First World War was very different from the Second World War from many perspectives, And in this perspective as well, all these elements of resistance, collaboration, and retribution was very much not happening in the same way after the First World War than in the Second World War, which actually affected millions, sometimes on both sides or in every category, right? I'm not going into details about that, but definitely that's the kind of new element, that it was really a kind of mass phenomenon, that this issue was a new factor. Also, I'm not going into all details about the kind of prehistory of the Second World War, which István has in the book as a very strong chapter or kind of part of the book, which is about asking the question whether the Second World War had any chance to be stopped before it happened, actually. So why the Second World War was not stopped by those who actually eventually were victorious, that is the Western powers, especially, and of course the Soviet Union on the other side, but still, basically nobody did anything, right? As we know the story. Hitler was not stopped at a time when he was still weak or not so much prepared for the war, and he brings up a lot of arguments concerning the kind of responsibility, not only the so-called big powers, the great powers like Britain and France, which is regular as a responsibility issue, but also the smaller parts of Europe, both on the western side of Europe and in Eastern Europe. All of these countries actually suffered a lot eventually from German occupation and German kind of alliance, even when they were allied with Germany. That was a kind of sacrifice, and that was a big loss, especially after the Second World War. It became the really big loss, because the victims of Germany on the western side of Europe actually did not suffer the same kind of way what the Eastern European countries actually were suffering from Soviet domination, coming from the Soviet occupation of the region, right? So that's one important thing which István is raising here and drawing attention to. The other thing is he calls this an ideological war, and actually analyzes the whole conflict, the Second World War, as an ideological war, which is a very important thing, and not only an ideological war, but in a certain sense it was a kind of ideological war on both sides, on the Western Front and the Eastern Front as well. Because of Nazi Germany, it's a well-known story, everybody knows it. It was something which was aimed at creating a new order based on German superiority and everything else. And in that sense, this was true for both sides, West and East alike. However, it also was a racial war which then was much more present in the case of the eastern side, that is on the Eastern Bloc, East Central Europe and the Balkans, than what happened in the Western side. And also, István draws attention to, in this context, to the investigation of the need of German brutality. If you investigate this on the Western side, you will find much less. If you investigate it on the Eastern side, you have a lot. While on the Western side there is violence, there is kind of revenge and many other things, but usually after some provocation. On the Eastern side, you didn't need any provocation. It was just for fun, in many cases, as István puts in some points, at some points in the book. So in that sense, the whole issue was very different on the Eastern Front and the Western side of Europe. And then the other important issue is the ethnic cleansing issue. István actually is presenting it in a very strong statement that he deals with this issue, talking about it, that this was one of the crucial aims and goals of not just the Germans, because we know about the Germans, right, what they meant by ethnic cleansing. And my colleague László Karsai will talk about the Holocaust in great detail. Now we are talking about many other issues, which meant other groups of people and ethnic groups and everything else. And then this is about like the claim that, let's say, the partisans, the Ukrainian partisans fighting the Polish people, Polish local people, were actually trying to do ethnic cleansing, because they wanted to get rid of those people on the other side. And the Novi Sad massacre in the case of Hungary in 1942, of course, he is depicting this as a kind of massacre of Serbs and Jews with the definite idea of ethnic cleansing in that period. And the final point is about let's say Germany's allies. Just in one sentence, he talks about a very important fact that Germany's allies, like Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, Finland, these countries were technically much more independent during the war than it is generally assumed today by not just the general public, but also most of the scholars as well. That's just one statement. And also, in some cases, he says, they were becoming more and more a burden for Hitler's Germany than an asset. And finally, a kind of shocking or very spectacular claim, which is in the book, is that Romania's switching sides in August 1944 like shortened the war as much or even more than the Normandy landing of the Western Allies. Well, this is a fantastic statement because you can never prove it, right? But you also can never prove the opposite of this claim, right? So it's a very tricky claim, you know, and that was really what István was about in many, many ways in his scholarship. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker would be or would have been Charles Gatti, but unfortunately for health reasons he was unable to join us. He comes from Johns Hopkins University and his major fields of research were 1956 and 1890. He has published extensively about this issue, and I take the liberty to try to summarize partially read, partially summarize his main point. He decided to write about István and the 1956 revolution. On November the 1st, 1956, when Soviet troops had left the capital city of Budapest and the Hungarian Revolution seemed to be victorious, István was in New York. He wanted to go home to see his family, so he sold his car, brand new car, I have, VW, for $800. He needed that money to buy an airline ticket. It doesn't say whether it's a one-way ticket or a two-way ticket. So he ordered one from Pan Am. He was very much excited because he hadn't seen his family since he left in 1948. But unfortunately, he had to return the ticket, as we know, because on November the 1st, the Soviet troops took over and crushed the revolution. But fortunately, István was able to make Pan Am refund the $800. So when Gatti explains how they met at Radio Free Europe in headquarters at 2 Park Avenue in the late 60s, and István was essential in convincing Radio Free Europe people to buy some original 1956 revolution newspapers from Charles Gatti for $164, which at that time was a substantial amount of money. And this is how they got to know each other, and he frequently visited István in his office. It was much later, 15 years later, because he had Charles Gatti came to Columbia in Mr. Jasinski's Research Institute for Communist Affairs, and this is how they became very good friends. He explains how they were talking Hungarian and smoking pipes, so making them very special in that environment. Had extensive discussions about the salami, the Hungarian sausage, whether there were two options, the pig and the other one, and which is better. So this is describing, but István was very much interested in Charles Gatti's political connections and political views, and they had extensive exchanges. But as Charles writes, to the best of my knowledge, he kept up to date about 56 by reading and studying anything whatever came to his attention. Still, he didn't frequently speak about, in the New York Review of Books, he occasionally wrote about 1956, but he gave relatively few lectures about 1956. The one he gave at Woodrow Wilson Center in Washington during a sabbatical in the 1990s showed great familiarity with the scholarly literature on 56. True, he was more in his element when dealing with such topics as European collaboration or the Horthy regime. And Charles Gatti reminds us of an anecdote. I will never forget what he said about Miklós Horthy, Hungary's ruler in the interwar period. Horthy, István said, should have received an award for his party's successful effort to save the Jews of Budapest in 1944, but then soon thereafter should have been shot as a war criminal. So this is very typical of István's approaches. I also credit him for his interpretation that anti-Semitism was an underlying, if at times only implicit, theme of Hungarian political history in the 20th century. And only in 2006-7, some 50 years after the revolution, did István address some of the key issues, historical controversies in articles in the New York Review of Books. He also noted that while the revolution's prime minister was being recognized as a hero and martyr, then the most responsible for judicial murder, János Kádár, is remembered by Hungarians as one of the most successful statesmen in the country's history. Once again, István showed his appreciation of multiple truths. He brought up in one of his articles a Finnish outcome for Hungary in 1956, calling it imaginable. So István has great imagination, and I think that for all scholars in humanities and art, imagination is very, very important. So he agreed that 1956 was a clean or pure revolution, but he immediately added that the expressions of popular anti-Semitism made it less so. In general, and most interestingly, he stated that once a revolution starts, you can't stop it. He seemed to regret that a bunch of hot-headed youngsters took over the street from adults who started it all. That regret reflected his view that history would be better for all if made by those who could think and calculate the consequences when they do so. Paradoxically, he reached a large audience via the articles in the New York Review about the historic import of the 1956 revolution, while in his heart he was a liberal reformer. So this was the summary of the contribution of Charles Gáti, and now I have got the honor and pleasure to introduce my colleague László Karsai, who is a specialist of the Holocaust in Hungary. He is the leader of a number of very important projects, especially the Yad Vashem project that Judith also participated in, that is collecting every Jewish-related source in Hungary between 1938 and 45. He is the scholar who doesn't shy the public. So whenever he hears something or reads something that is perhaps not so much in line with his views and his historical scholarship, he stands up and his word is heard. So, and he is going now to summarize István about the Holocaust. So let's see the word. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Let me start to the István Deák and the Holocaust topic with a few personal remarks. When I first entered the elegant 12th floor apartment at 410 Riverside Drive, he told me before I arrived here several times in phone, told the taxi driver 410 Riverside Drive. I remember. On January 31, 1993, I had already been researching the history of the Hungarian Holocaust for 10 years. My slim monograph on the Gypsy Holocaust in Hungary was published in the autumn of the previous year. My father, like István, was a Holocaust survivor, and my grandmother was also killed during the Holocaust in Auschwitz in summer 1944. My father was a Holocaust survivor and a Holocaust historian, and I found his thick documentary books on the bookshelf in István's study room. I came to New York for a half a year on a scholarship. In István's apartment, the kitchen was even smaller then. There was a tiny room at the end of its own small bathroom. This became my home. Many Hungarian liberal oppositioners had already lived there before me. Gloria cooked wonderfully, and they often had dinner guests. After they left, she rested, read, watched TV, clearing the table, and especially washing the dishes was left to István. I quickly realized that if I helped him, especially to wipe the dishes and cut early, but he washed precisely and carefully, I could ask questions, and he would answer willingly. There were times when he didn't answer my cautious objections or a particularly difficult question immediately, thought about it, didn't move. Gloria once came to the kitchen and remarked that István does the dishes faster when he is alone. Many times the answer to one of my questions was the name of a Holocaust historian, the title of an important monograph or study. Sometimes he added, of course, it is in the Butler Library, but it is here on my shelf as well. You can take it off, but then put it back. Those who are familiar with his essays on the Holocaust, because his writing published in New York Review of Books, in the New Republic, or in the New Yorker, cannot be called book reviews. Nor does István never researched this topic in archives. How dare he? How was he able to write such quality studies? Perhaps he drew strength from his personal experiences. When he wrote about witnessing at a railway station in 1944, that railwaymen were selling drinking water to the Jews locked in wagons at astronomical price, or in another writing he mentioned his grandmother who was killed by Arrow-Cross gunmen. The readers could guess that at that time 18 years old István in 1944 also saw and survived a lot that he will never forget. He was fully armed when he wrote about the Hungarian Holocaust for the first time in 1981-1982. Reviewing Randolph Graham's pioneering monograph, the later globally known, recognized, and respected Holocaust expert. He read everything that interested him, but only wrote about the books that Robert Silvers asked him to write about. As he later wrote with no little self-awareness, there was often a battle of titans between them over one paragraph, one sentence, or even one word. His essays on the Holocaust were like himself, elegant, self-assured, when necessary tough and decisive, sometimes brutally honest, and not infrequently ironic and provocative. Iron hand in velvet gloves. He hated and despised the nationalists and referred to the Austro-Hungarian monarchy with nostalgia. It is no coincidence that the original English title of his monograph, written about the officers of the Habsburg monarchy, was Beyond Nationalism. He believed and proved it based in his original Austrian and Hungarian archival research. One of the great achievements of the Joint Army was the assimilation and integration of the Hungarian Jews. The reserve rank, officer rank, meant entry into proper gentlemanlike Christian society before the First World War, and especially before the revolutions, communist and Jews-led revolution of 1918-1919. Deák did not simply react. He not merely reviewed the published books, but raised new questions, dispelled myths and legends. One of the most important questions was the title of one of the most important review. Could the Hungarian Jews have survived the Holocaust? He asked in his 1982 essay on Randolph Graham's book, which sparked a huge debate. According to him, the frightening answer to this question is yes. If we Hungarians, had collaborated better and more enthusiastically with the Nazis, and Regent Miklós Horthy and Prime Minister Miklós Kállai did not clumsily try to make a separate peace, provoking the German occupation of Hungary in March 1944. When American historian Helen Fein directed István confidently to read her book, where she had argued that the decisive factor in the survival of the Jews in a given country was the degree of anti-Semitism before the war, István asked back ironically, then why the Romanian and the French Jews survived the Holocaust? If we include the German occupation policy among the factors threatening survival, we are where István started from. Professor McKeck, on the other hand, considered the democratic traditions and liberal policies of a country as the best guarantees for the survival of the Jews. For example, the Jews of England survived the Holocaust. István warned his fellow professor with not small amount of irony that he was talking about Hitler's Europe, and England was not invaded by the Nazis. And yes, English Jews survived World War II. Spanish and Portuguese Jews also survived World War II. Also, it would be difficult to call the rule of Franco and Salazar democratic, remarked István. In 1989, he again asked, which country was more useful to the anti-Nazi cause during World War II, Denmark or the Czech Protectorate, where German troops were sent for rest and recreation, or Poland, where the Germans got killed. The Danes surrendered almost without firing a single shot. The Czech military industry was indispensable for the Wehrmacht, and the Czech workers, who were better fed than the German workers, rarely went on strike. It is also thanks to Leon Juris' Exodus that the legend of the Danish king riding out of the royal castle with a yellow star pinned on his chest, while no one speaks about the German navy, under whose eyes the Jews could be transported from Denmark to Sweden for weeks. Today, even more than 20 or 30 years ago, Polish collaboration in the Holocaust is a deadly serious issue. Since 2018, anyone who claims that there were Poles who collaborated with the Nazis in the massacre of Jews can be imprisoned for 3 years in Poland. In 1989, Deák dared to ironize. I am still convinced that the Germans would have found it easy to recruit some Polish volunteers to kill the Jews, as well, except for the fact that, to the eternal glory of Poland, the Nazis did not, so far as we know, dare to trust any Pole with weapons. The description of the situation in Lithuania is also elegant and concise in one of István's review. There was anti-Semitism even before the war. The Soviet occupation of 1940-1941 involved mass terror, and local left-wing Jewish Soviet collaborators also took part in it. In June 1941, Lithuanians welcomed the Germans as liberators, and when political prisoners released from prison and anti-Soviet partisans began killing Jews in mass pogroms, no one tried to act against them. In Hitler's Europe, he also emphasized this several times, the Jews had a better chance to survival in states that collaborated with the Nazis and were allied with them than in occupied countries that fought heroically against the Nazis and then suffered defeat. Italy, Hungary, Romania, Slovakia, Bulgaria, Finland, Denmark, and Vichy France belong to the first group. The political elite in these countries emphasized István saw the Jews as bargaining chips. Their fate depended on whether they wanted to please the Allies or the Nazis. The Dutch and Norwegians tried to resist in 1940, and after their defeat, their leaders fled. The bureaucrats and policemen who remained in the country did what the Nazis wanted. In implementing the Jewish policy, the Nazis were hindered more by their allies than by their enemies in each occupied country. 100% of the Bulgarian and Finnish Jews, 80% of Italian Jews, and 75% of the French Jews survived the Holocaust, and Romanians were also doing very well in this survival race. Of course, these seemingly simple facts could have been known if someone like István carefully read Raoul Hilberg's monograph published first in 1961, which is still considered a fundamental work. He never claimed that the historian should research and publish regardless of our everyday political and social conditions. In 1989, on the verge of the collapse of the Soviet system and on the real liberation of Eastern Europe, he wrote, I quote him, "The Western nations will have to choose between willing support for the East European liberation movements, no matter how confusing they seem to us now, and the denial and moral and economic assistance because of these nations' alleged historic crimes." He never tried to deny or minimize the importance of the fact that certain groups of the local population in Poland, Ukraine, and Baltic states voluntarily and enthusiastically participated in the persecution, robbery, and murder of Jews. But he never accepted that anywhere, any country, and any people would be told that everyone in there is collectively guilty. In 1996, I was lucky again. I was his guest again at 410 Riverside Drive. When the phone rang one morning, they called him from the New York Times. They asked him for a statement about the book of Daniel Goldhagen, Hitler's Willing Executioners. He dismissed it by saying that he hadn't read it all the way through yet, but he told the journalist that he couldn't accept the basic thesis of the young Harvard political scientist, according to which every single German already absorbed a destructive, demonic, eliminationist, anti-Semitic culture with her grandmother milk. I am very proud of the fact that when István summarized the Goldhagen debate in a large study the following year, he quoted my study published in a Hungarian journal at length. I looked over the protocols taken in 1945 with 3,800 Hungarian Holocaust survivors, and I estimated the number of Germans to be in the tens of thousands whom the Hungarian Jews, Hungarian Holocaust survivors Jews, considered human, helping them, sometimes saving their lives, and so on. They were seen and described as Germans. He even quoted my statement that to generalize from the members of a mass murdering police battalion to all Germans is just as unfounded as claiming that the German righteous among the nations are the embodiment of the real Germans. But I am most proud of the fact that when he presented Bettina Burns, Canadian historian's criticism of Goldhagen, István remarked that she criticized Goldhagen even more sharply than I did. According to István, I won the silver medal as the Who Can Criticize Goldhagen Sharper World Championship. In 2004, István returned to the Goldhagen debate very briefly by praising Christopher Browning's new books, and he clearly stood up in the long, obsolete functionalist, intentionalist debate alongside Browning, already with the title of his essay, Improvising the Holocaust. Starting this talk, I mentioned how much I was able to talk and to learn from István by doing the dishes. In conclusion, I will mention another opportunity for our conversation. István was very happy to discover one morning that I had come home tired, sweaty, and muddy, because, as usual, I had run in Riverside Park. A few days later, he invited me to run together. Sensitive, personal information follows. I was at that time 43 years old. István was 67. I couldn't keep up with him. I couldn't even slow him down, only when I asked very hard, difficult questions about the Holocaust, because as a good teacher and a regular runner, he couldn't watch me panting a meter or two behind him. I couldn't hear what he was saying, and you would stumble if you looked backward while running. I am now forever alone on my long runs. Thank you, István, for your patience, your advice, your help, and your friendship.
Thank you very much. And last speaker in the panel is Professor Peter Pastor from Montreal University, whose major field is Hungarian-Soviet relationships during the 20th century, mainly the interwar period. And he is also the kind of person who keeps an eye on what is going on in historical scholarship and memory politics in Hungary, and is ready to express his views whenever he has to. Peter promised to give a short summary of a so-called round table, Hungarian round table. So that was an informal gathering of Hungarian intellectuals in New York. This is part what he's going to present. It's part of a longer essay that he sent to most of us, and some of us had, I think all of us, maybe all of us, on one or two occasions to participate in these wonderful meetings. So, Peter.
This morning, Professor Glassheim mentioned that these former students of István formed an intellectual community. Well, István had another intellectual community, and those people were Hungarian speakers, including some of the students. And we started out in 2006, early 2006, when István returned from California, from Stanford, and he wanted to talk about some Hungarian issues, and he asked the five of us to reflect on what's going on in Hungary and the past of Hungary. We were meeting at the Pertutti Italian restaurant near 112th Street and Broadway, close to István's home. The review of the restaurant was that it was mediocre food and unfriendly service. But for us, what was important is that we could talk about our favorite topics. At first, these are the founders of the group, the 6 of us, including István. But by 2010, István counted 17 regular members who were meeting either twice or once a month. At our first meetings, or the major topic of our discussion was that we were like a sounding board for István's ideas for those monographs of World War II and the Holocaust that he was reviewing for the New York Review of Books. But 2006 was also the anniversary year of the 1956 revolution, and that was also a topic that we were involved with because the 5 of us lived through that revolution, and of course István looked at the revolution from New York, as we heard. One of our visitors was Tibor Glant, who was from the University of Debrecen, and he was doing research on American memory of 1956, and we had a lively discussion about that. And when his book appeared next year, it included an introduction by István, in which he titled his introduction, Revolutionary Traditions in Hungary, and his thesis was that one of the peculiarities of Hungarian history is that revolutions have been sparked by real and perceived grievances of the social elite. There were already in 2006 some temporary visitors who joined us, and you can see we were sitting at Pertutti around the round table, and that's how the name we acquired, that we were sitting at the round tables. And this picture in 2006, we have 2 visitor sociologists, Zoltán Tar and Judith Marcus. Judith Marcus is related by marriage to Attila. And then the 3 members of the... Pardon me? Yeah. Okay. And we have 3 other members of the original participants in the round table. In 2000 and how do I go back? Okay. Okay. In 2007, some of our regulars became the visiting professors of the Deák chair, and of course, again, I refer to Attila, who always was with us when he was a visiting professor, but also Tibor Frank and Csaba Békés was also joining us. From the Hungarian government, we had László Orsos, who was the director of the Hungarian Cultural Center, and in 2007, the Hungarian Consul General, Viktor Polgár, also joined us. A regular became Andrew Római, an economist and businessman, a friend of István Deák and George Soros. Temporary visitors from Hungary were János Kőbányai, the editor of Past and Present, and a young Holocaust scholar, Gábor Kádár. Here, Kőbányai took some pictures at that time when he was with us, István, and the round table again at Pertutti. Pertutti closed down in February 2008, And István started to look for a new place, and he found one within a few months, and that was the Columbia Cottage. The Columbia Cottage was a successor to a Hungarian restaurant, the Green Tree, and some of you were probably having lunch or dinner there. Unfortunately, the young owner of the Green Tree died in heart failure, and after that the Hungarian restaurant closed down. But when we met there for the first time, and István called us to meet at the cottage, he said, we could empty our teacup to the memory of the Green Tree, the Hungarian restaurant. Our first meeting, the major topic was about the anti-Semitic incident in a Jewish neighborhood of the 13th district, and there was a reaction to that. In Hungary, the extreme rightists were very upset that this became known in the West, and our visitor from 2007, Gábor Kádár, wrote us from Budapest that this is how the right feels about what's going on. Again, the dirty Jews do not shrink from calling the country anti-Semitic. Tibor Frank, who also returned to Hungary, was more circumspect, and his reaction was that things are going pretty badly in Hungary. He was very pessimistic. In 2008, Attila Pók was the visitor, and Miklós Miller from Rockefeller University, a bioscientist, joined us regularly, and he was also, or he is, an art collector, Hungarian modern art, and his friend Oliver Botár from Canada would join us whenever he would be in New York for a few weeks. Müller was happy to join us, but he regretted that at this Chinese restaurant we were sitting at a long table rather than around the round table, and communicating with everybody was more difficult. In 2011, things changed. Because the restaurant, when we were to meet, was full, none of the long tables were available, and in the back of the restaurant was a huge round table which was used by the help to clean Chinese vegetables. And this became the table where we then met, and István's comment was, we huddled happily around a veritable round table, and everybody was able to talk to everybody. And from then on, the management provided us with that round table whenever we met there. In 2009, we had some new regulars, Charles Gatti, and Emese Ivan, and Julia Sonnenfeld, László Hámos, who was the president of the Hungarian Human Rights Foundation in Manhattan, and some visitors, Péter Balázs, the foreign minister of Hungary, and László Darvasi, a well-known writer and editor of the Hungarian Literary Weekly. One of the topics that was an important one in 2019, because of the world economic crisis, the Hungarian Prime Minister, Socialist Prime Minister, Minister Ferenc Gyurcsány, resigned. And István received a letter from a historian friend of his writing about who's going to succeed him. And this person wrote about the possibility of Ferenc Glotz, who in the past was the president of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences and the director of the Historical Institute. We didn't get to know his name. István circulated this letter and asked us for a reaction. he showed us the letter, and in the letter, again, Glatz was favored, but the writer also mentioned Viktor Orbán as the conductor of hatred. And István responded to this in a kind of prophetic way. As we know who Orbán is now, is known all over the United States and Europe. And István said that Orbán was the enemy of democracy, but he also recognized that a meaningful number of people supported him in Hungary, and he tried to answer why was that. And his answer was that there were miseducated generations who lined up behind pernicious leaders, and he brought up those pernicious leaders, Horthy, Kádár, Szálasi, and others. So he hoped that Glatz indeed would become the next prime minister, but it was not so. The economist and businessman Gordon Bajnai was named prime minister, and in the fall of 2009, Bajnai and Balázs came to New York to the General Assembly meeting, and Bajnai even presented a lecture at SIPA, and you can recognize the upstairs lecture room where he gave his lecture. Now in 2010, Orbán and Fidesz won an overwhelming victory, and almost immediately Viktor Polgár was recalled, although he was here only for 3 years, so he should have been here for another year, but was recalled. And he invited us to a reception of the Hungarian consulate. It was a farewell reception, but he also asked us, the round table, to meet him for a last lunch at the Columbia Cottage, and we met there, and among our guests was the former Prime Minister Gordon Bajnai and his daughter Zsófi. The next Hungarian Consul General was also invited. He was a professional ambassador and professional diplomat, and we had no problem with him. But when he came to join us for the first time on March 18, Attila Pók was there, and we also had a guest from Hungary, the human rights activist Miklós Haraszti, and we all expressed our concern that the Hungarian government intended to return archival materials to the victims of communism. And we all believe that these documents belong to the archives. They shouldn't be given away. And we expressed this opinion to Károly, and his response was that he's going to send our objection to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The Hungarian government dropped this plan. I don't want to say that we were responsible for it, but hopefully I assume that there was a little step that we took in this direction. The most memorable meeting we had at this big Chinese roundtable was the 7-member Hungarian Socialist Party delegation which joined us in February 2013. They came from Washington, where they met State Department officials, campaign specialists of the Obama administration, Charles Gatti and some others, and they were very optimistic among us that they're going to win next year's election in 2014. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. What happened, however, in 2014 is that Columbia Cottage closed down, and István was on the road again, looking for a place where we could meet, the 17 of us, and he discovered a new place, the Szechuan Garden on 105th Street, and they didn't have a round table, but what they had was a back room, with long tables, and this is where we were meeting. The reason why Columbia Cottage closed was that they had problem with the increased strength. Now, in 2014, we also invited the next ambassador, since Károly Dán had 4 years here, and he returned to Budapest and went to Vienna to represent Hungary at EBESZ. And the new Consul General was Ferenc Kumin, who was appointed by the new foreign minister of Hungary, an arrogant and corrupt person who is still an arrogant and corrupt foreign minister. And when Kumin came and joined us at this new restaurant, he essentially was talking in propaganda terms, and the people present there tried to disagree with him and argued with him, and we realized that this guy will not be invited again. The next day, I received an email from Charles Gatti, who was there, but by the time he went back to Washington, and he wrote, "This was not a useless meeting, but the dude did not know what was waiting for him. In my opinion, he was surprised. Everybody was excellent." At the end of the year, in the Hungarian opposition paper, Népszabadság, a very popular opinion writer in Népszabadság, Gustav Megyesi, wrote and agreed with our assessment that Kumin is a non-entity. Now, 2014 was also the year when we had some of the Hungarian-speaking students of István who showed up. Most of all, Harley case, I don't remember precisely if Robert or Paul Hannebrink came in 2014. It may have been earlier, a year or two, but they were also there visiting us. But Harley case, when she came after interviewing István Deák for a project, but she found the participants of the round trip quite interesting, so he interviewed a number of them, including Ivan Sanders, Miklós Müller, the biologist, Andrew Római, the businessman, and András Körner, who's here. And András was, or is, an architect by profession, but he's also a historian of Jewish-Hungarian culinary art. And in fact, in 2020, his book won the National Jewish Book Award. Now, at the end of 2015 and 2016, during the winter, the Deáks joined Eva and the family in California to check out the world there. They were already considering moving there. And soon after they returned, it was time for a celebration of István's 90th birthday. And this was, again, at the meeting room at SIPA, and it was sponsored by East Central European Center of Colombia's Harriman Institute. The roundtable regulars were there at the celebration, and we received a note afterwards. Herein, I thank you that you came in large numbers to my not very modest, but for me forever memorable celebration of my 90th birthday. Now, by 2019, it was evident that they will have to move because of the illnesses. And István wrote us back from California with a letter, a letter that had the title "The Great Trek in a Covered Wagon to California," in which he let us know that he's going to stay there, but he also reminded us that he'll be in New York again in January, and we had a farewell luncheon for him at the Szechuan Garden, and Susan Glantz, one of the original participants of the round table, brought in a birthday cake, but István's birthday was in May. So she came around this problem by arguing that, well, we're counting every day since István was born. And so on that day when we met, István was born 34,226 days ago. So this is how we celebrated. And in fact, it was the last roundtable meeting before the COVID closed down Manhattan, and we could, in effect, consider that this was the end of 15 years of intellectual exchanges. However, in 2022, in September, a young historian from NYU, Mátyás Mérvai, he's there too, decided to revive this roundtable at the Szechuan Garden, and we can see some people there, and we can see András Körner is there too. And István wrote on December 2 for the December meeting, "I thank you very much to all my colleagues that you report to me about your life and accomplishments. I would hurry to you, but 3,000 miles is too much for one who, despite his blessed efforts, falls on his face and following that he can get up only with some help. I should be wearing a football helmet. With much affection, István." And this was, of course, his last letter. We know that in January the next year he died. Now, about the tributes the roundtable received, and it received many, I picked only 4. Tibor Grant, in his book on American memory, said the group was extremely helpful with comments, ideas, and guidance. Gábor Kádár, with whom I corresponded recently, he wrote, "I remember that I listened and learned a great deal during my meeting with István and his friends." And Miklos Müller, when he joined us in 2008, he wrote, "It was pleasant that we could talk about interesting things that are outside of the narrow topic of my profession." And Viktor Polgár, the Consul General, when he left, he said that our group was his favorite little community during his 3 years of service. So at this point, I thank you for your attention.
So thank you very much. So you know, Hungarians, when they are given a chance, they are trying to exploit it to as much as possible. So we have overstepped our time. So we might have to skip the question and answer period, just in case if there is something desperately important that is deeply suppressed in someone's soul. That should be perhaps, but as I see, that is not the case. If that is not the case, then I have to repeat our sincere gratitude to all the organizers of this event and to all the people, friends, who were responsible for setting up the István Deák visiting professorship that has been shaping the lives of not only of who are now sitting at the table, but also a great number of other people. And we very much hope that this will be taken up by upcoming generations. A young member is sitting here, and thank you very much, and then we are going to proceed further, as I assume, at 2:30, right? At 2:30. So we'd like to say thank you very much.